Korea's space rocket Nuri is scheduled to take off later on this Thursday evening, following its launch cancellation on Wednesday, in light of a technical glitch detected fewer than 3 hours before blastoff. So what was the technical issue that caused the cancellation? What are pundits saying about Nuri's prospects going forward? And what are Korea's chances of gaining a competitive edge despite its relatively late space entry? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. In this edition, we revisit Korea's space ambitions as Nuri gears up for its third space launch. For more, I have Professor Paul Yoon at Camino College, who is also a Solar System Ambassador of NASA. Professor Yoon, it's great to have you back.
Good to have you. Thank you.
Right. I also have Stephen Clark, editor of Spaceflight Now. Mr. Clark, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Professor Yoon, in a televised briefing some 2 hours before the planned launch yesterday, that is Wednesday, First Vice Minister of Science Tae-seok announced a communication anomaly between the launch control computer and the launch pad control computer. Could you explain this for us?
Anomaly means basically there's a problem between communication between two computer systems. So I noticed that there's the low temperature helium's supply valve, which is necessary to control the pressure of tank inside the tank of the propellant tank. That was not working using computer system. But at the same time, the manually was working. So if the Korea can resolve that software problem, Korea is ready to launch it. But also, I want to point it out, delay is very common. For example, last year, NASA's Artemis lunar mission was very successful. We actually went back to the moon, we came back, but it was a delay 4 times. So if the Koreans resolve this software problem, the Nuris should be ready to go.
Right, and Mr. Clark, as Professor Yoon has pointed out, staying with the Science Ministry's announcement, officials have also claimed that such glitches, such delays are the norm. What do you say?
Well, I've covered a lot of rocket launches in my career as a space journalist, and I can tell you, you never schedule a trip around a rocket launch, for example, because you can count on it being delayed either for weather or a technical reason. And as Professor Yoon mentioned, a highlight of that would be the Artemis 1 mission that NASA launched to the moon last year. That mission was delayed several months last year due to a series of leaks that NASA couldn't quite get their hands around and fix while the rocket was on the launch pad. And we've seen companies like SpaceX, which are very successful in the global commercial launch market, have delays on occasion due to technical problems, valve problems, software problems, and weather. So it's not unheard of at all. It's quite common.
Right, and that being said then, Mr. Clark, Korea now has a 7-day launch window that closes next Wednesday, that's May 31st. Its next launch time is scheduled for today, that's Thursday, at 6:24 p.m. Korea time. What are your prospects, Mr. Clark, of a successful launch within this time frame?
I think the odds are pretty good, although you never know for sure because anything can crop up in a countdown because there are thousands of things that are going on in a rocket to prepare it for launch when you get down to the final minutes before liftoff. I do understand that this team has run this rocket through a full rehearsal of the countdown leading up to this launch attempt. So presumably any of those issues that could crop up or could occur in the countdown have already been uncovered and fixed and potentially resolved. So really, I do have high confidence in getting this rocket off the ground by the end of the month, by May 31st, weather permitting. But it sounds like the weather is great down at the launch site today.
Right, it really looked great, as my colleague Shin Se-byuk pointed out. Meanwhile, Professor Yoon, the upcoming third launch will be the first to load and launch a commercial-grade satellite aboard the Nuri vehicle. Could you tell us a bit more about the payload?
The Nuri is carrying 8 small satellites. One of the main satellites is developed by KAIST, so-called next generation small satellite, which is a capability to observe Earth. But one thing interesting about is this satellite could observe Earth regardless of weather conditions. So whether there's a cloud or it's a rainy days or during the nighttime, it could make Earth observation possible. So that's very capable the feature. Another small satellite is measuring the cosmic radiations near the Earth orbit. Another interesting about, there are 4 of these small satellites developed by KASI, Korea Astronomy Space Science Institute. What they do is they're doing flying information in space, which means they're flying together and for measuring the space weather. So this is a pretty interesting technological demonstrations.
Right, I see. Mr. Clark, following its launch this time around, Korea's Nuri will shoot for the stars 3 more times over a span of 4 years. Is this enough to claim that we have perfected the practice, so to speak?
I wouldn't say perfected at all. I think we've seen rockets have anomalies, have launch failures many times. Even after they've flown hundreds of times, it's still called rocket science for a reason. It's quite a complex endeavor. So just a handful of launches in a few years is not going to perfect this design. And in fact, I think Korea is even starting to do feasibility studies of an even larger rocket that could eventually follow the Nuri rocket that could launch in the 2030s. So it may be accurate to view this almost as a stepping stone to a larger ambition for South Korea's space program. They want to gain some practice and some familiarity with the concept of launching a rocket into orbit on a smaller scale before they graduate to a much larger rocket that can carry maybe 10 times the payload mass into orbit.
Right. Mr. Clark, some scholars here in the country claim that Korea's jump onto the space bandwagon, if you will, has been quite late. What do you say?
Well, certainly they've come, it's a long way behind some of the leading spacefaring nations like the US, Russia, and China. But I will say that South Korea's, what they've demonstrated in the last 10 years or so has been a rapid growth to get to where they are. There are, I think, 10 countries that have demonstrated the ability to get a launcher into orbit, a satellite into orbit using their domestic products. And South Korea is, I think, the first country, or only the 3rd country in the 21st century to be able to do this. Most of the early adopters of space launch capability were back in the 1960s and 70s. So they are a little bit late to this, but I think they're taking it more seriously, and they have demonstrated more capability than some of the other recent countries that have joined this club, so to speak, like North Korea or Iran.
Right. And Professor Yoon, how do you respond to those who say that Korea's late venture into space will keep the country from maintaining a competitive edge over the global competition?
First of all, I agree with Mr. Clark that Korea started late, but it's going rapidly increasing its capabilities. I just want to point out all these incidents that when we talk about compatibility, I think you have to prove the market to the world that the world is watching what Korea's launching is about. They're watching not only capabilities. So last year, Korea proved that it could put the payload into the orbit. So that was good. But now, how about the safety issues? Is it Korea capable to detect early detection for any potential trouble? This is a good demonstration. This time, before 3 hours of launch, Korea's detected the problem, so they postponed the launching. I think that's a very good sign to show the world that Korea is able to detect any kind of potential trouble, technical problem for safety issues. So that's a good sign, proving the world that Korea is very reliable, has a launching capabilities. And furthermore, I want to expand one more thing. When you talk about global competitive edge, let's talk about, if you're talking on launching, yes, Korea started late, but we know that it's going to be continually growing, developed, improved. But I think I want to look at more global perspective, broad perspective. How about global economy scale, global space economy aspect? Korea is good at not only the automobiles, smartphone, or semiconductor, or batteries. We know that in the future, these are another area that's going to be important part of a space economy. So in that perspective, I don't think Korea is less than other countries. As long as Korea can utilize current technologies in space environment, Korea is very competitive in the long run. That's what I say.
Right, and staying with that, Korea, Mr. Clark, it's the 10th in the world to have secured space launch technology, and the 7th, I believe, to have developed a vehicle that can carry a satellite worth greater than a ton, that is, all in a span of some 12 years. Could you put this pace of development into some perspective for us?
Sure. I think it's important to remember that Korea's foray into space launch capability started about 12 years ago, as you mentioned, with the launch program that they had in partnership with Russia. They actually used Russian engines on their first rocket that reached orbit about a dozen years ago or so. But they quickly pivoted to using a fully domestic design for the Nuri rocket. I think that was a smart move, especially given the geopolitical situation right now with Russia around the world, with the war in Ukraine. A lot of Russian space technology is no longer accessible to the global market. We're seeing that in the United States. A lot of American companies have been using Russian engines and Russian propulsion and Russian designs and technology for their rockets. They're having to go to domestic supplies and domestic sources for those now. South Korea, with the Nuri program, made that decision long ago. So I think that was a big decision to make, an important choice to make at that point. And also, I think you talked about the capability to deliver a satellite of more than a ton into orbit. The other newcomers to space launch, like Iran and North Korea, can only launch a payload of maybe 100, maybe a few hundred kilograms into Earth orbit. And the Nuri from South Korea, we're already talking about 1.5 metric tons of mass into orbit. And South Korea has plans to grow even larger in the coming years with a more powerful rocket down the road. So we've talked about South Korea being a little bit late to this launch capability, but they already have a more capable rocket than any of the other recent entrants into this market.
Right. Professor Yoon, pundits say this third launch is also significant because it will be the first under the guidance of Hanwha Aerospace as the Korea Aerospace Research Institute transfers technology to the private sector. What are the implications of this public to private technology transfer?
I believe that space exploration is sustainable only through work with the government along with the private sectors. So we don't, if the working with the government means you're only, the citizens' tax money is to continue space exploration, I think that's not, it's hard to continue just using taxpayers' money. So you want to involve private sector. So transferring technology to the private sector, like Hanwha Aerospace industry, I think that's the right way to go. This is very analogous to what NASA executed the SpaceX. SpaceX was started, and initially they didn't have any technological foundation, but NASA continues to supply necessary technologies. Furthermore, NASA provide a chance for SpaceX to grow financially. How? They give them a chance to deliver the cargo to International Space Station, also astronaut transportation. So if the Korean government can provide private sector, not only transferring technology, but also providing way today make money through a government project, that way Korea's space industry will continually grow.
And Mr. Clark, while Korea, while it focuses on its launches, its space counterparts, I believe, appear to be working on reusable launch vehicles. Where do we stand in terms of reusable launch systems?
Yeah, this is a major trend in the global launch industry right now. We've seen SpaceX land and reuse their rockets with almost a routine schedule. Every few days, we're seeing a launch and a recovery and a reuse of a SpaceX rocket now. And they've built on that, and really they have a commanding position in the launch business right now. They have, I think they're planning up to 100 launches this year of their Falcon 9 rocket. So, we're talking about their competitors in the industry maybe launching single digits, maybe up to 10 at best in terms of numbers of launches in the commercial launch industry. So when you're able to reuse the rocket, you not only are saving money, you don't have to put the resources into building a new rocket each time. You also are enabling a faster launch schedule, so you can turn around the launch pad and put a rocket that's already in your inventory on the pad, fuel it up, and launch again. So it enables a great expansion of capability in terms of launch and launch rate. And South Korea is the Nuri is a fully expendable rocket, as is every other rocket in the world right now that's not a SpaceX rocket. But I think South Korea, with their next generation program, again, right now undergoing some feasibility study, the KSLV-3 is the name of it. They are looking at some reuse of technology and reuse of rocket components on that program. And the SpaceX in South Korea aren't alone. There are a lot of commercial companies here in the United States, like Relativity Space, a rocket lab, that are developing next generation rockets that will be at least partially reusable, because that is the way of the future. That's where the market is going, because the customers, the satellite owners, want to see lower costs and higher launch rates in order to get their payloads into orbit.
Right, I see. Moving forward, Professor Yoon, do you see Korea's commercial-grade satellite launch as perhaps providing Korea with the chance to build a space-based surveillance system?
Yeah, system, it's like a system that you could observe the Earth or any kind of objects out there. This time, the next generation small satellite, as I mentioned earlier, it is capable to observe clearly on Earth, regardless of weather condition, even during the nighttime. That's a very important feature for good surveillance. But also at the same time, the other satellite, Korea is learning about how to operate different type of satellite in space environment. So that is also necessary to make a better surveillance system. So through a lot of more upcoming satellite operation in space, Korea will develop great surveillance systems in space.
Right, hopefully. Mr. Clark, staying on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea has spoken of plans to launch its first space satellite, but there are pundits who've been rather skeptical about its potential success. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we did see an image of what this satellite might look like. I think when Kim Jong-un visited a facility in North Korea a few weeks ago to inspect the satellite, it looks like it's about the size of maybe a small refrigerator. And a satellite of that size, it's bigger than anything the North Koreans have sent into orbit so far, but it is well below the size and scale and capability of any of the spy satellites or military satellites that are operated by, we're talking about the big countries that are in military space operations like the US, Russia, and China. So it is a little bit larger in scale, but something of this size maybe could track things like ships moving around in the sea, maybe large truck convoys moving around on the Korean Peninsula or elsewhere around the world. But you're not going to be able to identify, individual soldiers, for example, or individual trucks or anything like that with a satellite of that size. We just saw a picture of it, I think, on your air there. So it's about the size of a refrigerator, and it's a little bit bigger than what they've launched before, but it's nothing even in the same league of the capability of the big military space powers.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, back here on the southern part of the peninsula, Professor Yoon, the Yoon administration's space campaign includes a moon landing in 2032 and a Mars landing by 2045. How feasible is this ambitious goal, do you think?
I just want to point out Korea's Lunar and Mars mission plan is very well aligned with NASA's Artemis program. NASA this year, last year NASA succeeded orbiting around the moon. This year, we are going to send 4 astronauts to the moon. They're going to orbit around the moon and come back. Next year, we are going to, astronaut will land on the moon, 2025, and continually NASA will, after that, Artemis 3, 4, 5 will continually come. So in that sense, Korea's lunar mission 2033, by the time Korea sends the payload to the moons, there are going to be a lot of activity done by NASA and Indonesia partners. So it is well aligned. So there's a great chance that Korea's lunar mission will be feasible. Furthermore, NASA is planning to send a human to the Mars by the late 2030s. So which is again aligned to Korea's Mars mission. So Korea signed Artemis Accord. Korea is a very important part of the one of the Indonesia partners signed Artemis Accord. If Korea is working close with NASA and Indonesia partner, Korea's Lunar and Mars mission will be very feasible. That's what I believe.
And Mr. Clark, beyond Korea, I believe a completely commercial astronaut mission that has just docked at the International Space Station. You covered it. Could you tell us a bit about your coverage?
Yes, I was there on Sunday when this mission launched from Kennedy Space Center here in Florida. This is the second fully private, fully commercial astronaut mission to go up to the International Space Station. And it's managed by a company based in Houston, Texas called Axiom Space. And they've partnered with NASA and they've partnered with SpaceX for this private astronaut mission. There are 4 people on board. One of them is a retired NASA astronaut named Peggy Whitson. She's actually the most experienced American astronaut in terms of time and space. And she's leading this team of 3 private astronauts. One of them is a wealthy U.S. businessman who paid for his seat. And there are 2 Saudi Arabian astronauts on board that were selected by the Saudi government. Their trip is funded by the Saudi government, and they're on the space station doing some experiments for Saudi scientists in fields like biomedical research and technology demonstration, and also doing some educational outreach to Saudi school children during their stay at the space station. They're going to be up there for about 8 days, and they're coming back to Earth around the end of the month. And this is part of NASA's strategy to transition low Earth orbit, which is a few hundred miles above the Earth where the International Space Station is. Once the International Space Station is retired, NASA wants to have an economy in low Earth orbit with privately owned space stations. And a mission like this is kind of a proof of concept that a market may exist for a commercial outpost or private space station to replace the ISS when it is retired.
Mr. Clark, some say that the start of space tourism can begin as early as this particular year. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it depends on how you define space tourism, because, this mission that I just talked about to the space station, there are 3 what I would call professional astronauts on board, the retired NASA astronaut and the 2 Saudi crew members. And then there's one person who had the resources and the wealth to pay for his own seat, which runs about $50 million based on what I'm hearing. So he paid his way. He's been a lifelong space enthusiast and always wanted to go to space, and he had the money to pay for his ticket. So that's a space tourist right there, depending on, some of them want to call themselves private astronauts or spaceflight participants, but he is going to space on his own accord. And the other segment of that market is what's called suborbital space. So these are missions that just go up to the edge of space and come right back down. You maybe experience 3 to 5 minutes of weightlessness, and you temporarily, just very briefly, go above the boundary of space, above the atmosphere. And companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin are in this market. And Blue Origin has already been flying space tourists to space for a number of years. And in fact, Virgin Galactic is flying a mission to a suborbital space just tomorrow. So the market is here. It's just a question of how big is the market, what are the ticket prices, and who can afford to go.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Yoon, one final question to you then. Korea and the U.S. signed a space pact during President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit in late April. What do you suppose is the significance of such deals?
The joint statement by the President Yoon and Vice President Harris signaled that there's going to be more collaboration between Korea and the U.S. Collaboration in space. So we could expect that 2 countries will work closely together to fight against climate change, or we could expect more exchange between among the students in space educations, more science collaboration, scientist collaboration, or also we're going to expect more technologies and research and development collaboration between these 2 countries. So I think these are the important factors that Korea's Lunar and Mars missions are possible. I think this is going to be a very important ground for the one to make Korea's future space mission more plausible and successful.
Right, hopefully you are correct. All right, Professor Yoon, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Mr. Clark, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.